Hey everyone, before we dive into this incredible true story, I'm curious, where are you watching from today? Drop your city or country in the comments below, and if you're ready for an absolutely mind-blowing story about the youngest person to ever represent themselves in family court, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Trust me, what you're about to witness will change how you think about age, intelligence, and the power of determination forever. Now let's begin. The sound that changed everything wasn't dramatic. It was barely a whisper. Emma Grace Thompson pressed her ear against the bathroom door of their Charlotte home, listening to her mother's muffled sobs for the third time that week. At 8 years old, Emma possessed an unusual gift. She could read people's emotions like others read picture books, and right now, her mother's pain was screaming. "Mommy?" Emma knocked softly, her small fist barely making a sound against the painted wood. "Just a minute, sweetheart," Sarah Thompson's voice cracked, followed by the hurried shuffle of tissues and running water. When the door opened, Sarah's red-rimmed eyes met Emma's penetrating gaze. Sarah had always marveled at her daughter's intelligence. Emma had been reading chapter books since age 4 and solving math problems that challenged fifth graders. But it was Emma's emotional intelligence that truly set her apart. "You're lying to me," Emma said matter-of-factly, crossing her arms, "and I can prove it." Sarah knelt down, forcing a smile that fooled no one. "Honey, sometimes grown-ups have bad days, I know." Emma's voice carried a weight beyond her years. "But this isn't a bad day, Mommy. This is something bigger. Something you think I can't handle because I'm just a kid." The accuracy of that statement hit Sarah like a physical blow. Michael, her soon-to-be ex-husband, had filed for custody, claiming Sarah was an unfit mother. The hearing was set for Friday, just 4 days away. His lawyers had made it clear. They intended to paint her as unstable, financially irresponsible, and emotionally damaged. "Emma, some things are just too complicated for children." Emma's eyebrows arched in a way that reminded Sarah painfully of her own mother. "Mommy, I know about the papers under your bed. I know Daddy wants to take me away from you. And I know you think you can't fight back because you don't have fancy lawyers like he does." Sarah's composure crumbled entirely. "How could you possibly—" "I can read, Mommy, really, really well." Emma's small hand found her mother's larger one. "But here's what you don't know yet." Sarah looked into her daughter's eyes, seeing a determination that both thrilled and terrified her. "I'm going to be your lawyer." 3 weeks earlier, Emma had been hunting for her missing library book when she discovered the shoebox hidden beneath her mother's bed. Children are naturally curious creatures, but Emma's curiosity operated on a different level entirely. While other 8-year-olds might have glanced at the papers and moved on, Emma's photographic memory absorbed every word. "Petition for child custody" blazed across the top of the first document in bold, unforgiving letters. Emma's reading comprehension was advanced enough to understand legal terminology that would confuse many adults. As she carefully read through each page, her young mind began constructing a timeline of deception and manipulation that would make seasoned investigators proud. Michael Thompson wasn't just seeking custody. He was systematically destroying Sarah's credibility. Bank statements showed he had stopped contributing to household expenses months before filing for divorce. Phone records revealed calls to private investigators. Most damning of all, Emma found emails between Michael and his attorney discussing strategy to demonstrate maternal incompetence. But it was the final document that ignited something fierce within Emma's chest. A psychological evaluation request suggesting that Sarah suffered from emotional instability and poor judgment that made her unsuitable for primary custody of a gifted child. Emma sat cross-legged on her mother's bedroom floor, surrounded by evidence of her father's betrayal, and made a decision that would change not just her family's life, but eventually the entire legal system's approach to children's rights. She was going to master family law. She was going to save her mother, and she was going to prove that being 8 years old didn't make her powerless. The next morning, Emma walked into Pineville Elementary School with a purpose that made her teacher, Mrs. Patterson, pause mid-sentence during morning announcements. Something had changed in Emma's demeanor overnight, a focused intensity that seemed almost adult. "Mrs. Rodriguez," Emma announced, marching into the school library with the confidence of a lawyer entering a courtroom, "I need every book you have about family law, Children's Rights and Court Procedures. Mrs. Rodriguez, the school librarian who had watched Emma devour advanced literature since kindergarten, raised an eyebrow. That's quite a specific request, Emma. Working on a project. You could say that, Emma replied, her jaw set with determination that made the librarian wonder if she was looking at a child or a very small adult. It's the most important project of my life. Emma's transformation over the following weeks was nothing short of extraordinary. While other second graders played during recess, Emma hunched over legal texts in the library corner, her small finger tracing complex sentences about custody statutes and children's rights. Mrs. Rodriguez had initially worried about the appropriateness of such heavy material, but Emma's focus was unwavering. In North Carolina, Emma muttered to herself, scribbling notes in her careful 8-year-old handwriting, children over the age of 7 can express preferences regarding custody if the court determines they possess sufficient maturity. She created a study system that would impress law students, color-coded notebooks for different legal concepts, timeline charts mapping her parents' relationship deterioration, and evidence logs documenting every interaction that might be relevant to the case. Her backpack, once filled with picture books and crayons, now contained copies of legal statutes printed from the library computer. "Emma," Mrs. Rodriguez said gently one afternoon, "are you sure you don't want to talk to someone about whatever's happening at home?" Emma looked up from a particularly dense section about guardian ad litem appointments, her eyes holding a gravity that made the librarian's heart ache. "Mrs. Rodriguez, do you know what happens to children when the legal system fails them?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. "They become invisible," Emma continued. "Adults make decisions about their lives based on money and pride and revenge, but nobody asks the children what they want. Nobody treats them like they have brains that work." Mrs. Rodriguez sat down beside Emma, studying the neat notes that demonstrated comprehension beyond graduate level. "And you think you can change that?" "I think I can start by changing what happens to me," Emma replied, her pencil already moving again. "Did you know that children in North Carolina have the right to request their own legal representation in custody cases? Most people don't know that. Most children don't know that." She paused, looking directly at Mrs. Rodriguez with an intensity that seemed to peer into her soul. "But I know it now, and I'm going to use it." Emma's investigation into her father's true motivations began with simple observation. Every child knows their parents' patterns, but Emma's analytical mind transformed casual knowledge into evidential proof. She noted that Michael's sudden interest in custody coincided exactly with the reading of his wealthy aunt's will, a document that included a substantial trust fund, accessible only if he maintained custody of Emma. The pieces of the puzzle fell into place with devastating clarity. Phone calls Emma had dismissed as work stuff were actually strategy sessions with his legal team. His recent attempts at father-daughter bonding weren't genuine affection. They were evidence-gathering opportunities designed to photograph a loving relationship for court presentation. But the most heartbreaking discovery came accidentally. Emma had been practicing her presentation in the hallway outside her father's home office when she heard him speaking to someone on the phone. "Look, I just need to get through this custody hearing." Michael's voice carried through the slightly open door. "Once I have legal custody, I can access Emma's trust fund to pay off my debts. Then I'll send her to that boarding school in Virginia. The kid's too smart for her own good anyway. Sarah can visit on holidays or whatever." Emma's world tilted. Her father wasn't fighting for her because he loved her. He was fighting for her because she represented financial salvation. The realization struck her like a physical blow, but instead of crumbling, something crystallized within her chest. Pure, focused determination. She tiptoed back to her room and added this revelation to her growing case file. If Michael Thompson thought he could manipulate the legal system to exploit his own daughter, he was about to learn that underestimating Emma Grace Thompson was the biggest mistake of his life. That night, as Emma organized her evidence and prepared her arguments, she whispered a promise to her reflection in the bedroom mirror. "I'm going to expose you, Daddy, and I'm going to save Mommy. And then I'm going to make sure no other kid ever has to go through this." The 8-year-old looking back at her from the mirror no longer looked like a child. She looked like a warrior preparing for battle. Sarah's discovery of Emma's legal research happened by accident on Thursday morning, exactly one day before the custody hearing. Sarah had been frantically searching for important documents when she noticed Emma's backpack partially unzipped, revealing carefully organized file folders and legal printouts. "Emma Grace Thompson," Sarah said, her voice a mixture of amazement and horror. "What exactly is all this?" Emma emerged from the bathroom, toothbrush still in hand, and assessed her mother's expression. The jig was up, but Emma had been preparing for this conversation for weeks. "It's my case preparation," Emma said simply, as if 8-year-olds routinely prepared legal cases. "Tomorrow I'm going to represent both of us in court." Sarah's legs gave out, and she sank onto Emma's bed, surrounded by evidence that her second grader had essentially taught herself family law. "Honey, you can't just... Children don't get to..." "Actually, they do." Emma sat beside her mother, opening one of her carefully organized folders. North Carolina General Statute 5013.2 specifically allows children to express preferences in custody determinations, and the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, which the US has signed, guarantees children the right to be heard in judicial proceedings affecting them. Sarah stared at her daughter, seeing not the child she'd been protecting, but a formidable advocate who had been protecting herself. "Emma, even if that's true, the court isn't going to take an 8-year-old seriously. Your father has real lawyers, expensive ones." Emma's eyes blazed with something Sarah had never seen before, righteous fury tempered by absolute confidence. "Mommy, expensive doesn't mean smart, and being an adult doesn't mean being right." Emma opened another folder, revealing a timeline of Michael's deceptions that was more thorough than anything Sarah's public defender had managed. "I've been watching Daddy's lawyers. They're sloppy because they think they're going to win easily. They think we're just a scared woman and a little kid." Emma stood up, her small frame somehow commanding the entire room. "They're wrong about both of us. You're not just a scared woman. You're the best mother in North Carolina, and I'm not just a little kid. I'm your advocate. And tomorrow, we're going to prove that love is stronger than money, truth is stronger than lies, and intelligence is stronger than prejudice." Sarah looked at her daughter and realized that somewhere in the past few weeks, Emma had grown up. Not in the way children are forced to grow up by trauma, but in the way heroes rise to meet impossible challenges. "Okay," Sarah whispered, her voice stronger than it had been in months. "Let's do this together." Friday morning arrived grey and drizzling, as if the sky itself were weeping for what was about to unfold at the Mecklenburg County Family Court. Sarah and Emma sat in their decade-old Honda Civic in the courthouse parking lot, reviewing their strategy one final time, while watching Michael emerge from a sleek black BMW with his legal team. Charles Morrison and Rebecca Hawthorne from Morrison, Hawthorne and Associates, cut imposing figures in their expensive suits, briefcases gleaming, exuding the kind of confidence that comes from never having lost a custody case involving significant assets. Michael had spared no expense. These were the lawyers who had successfully defended Charlotte's elite in the most contentious family disputes. "Look at them," Emma observed, her voice clinically detached. "Mr. E. Morrison's tie costs more than our groceries for a month. Ms. Hawthorne's shoes are Italian leather, probably $800. They want everyone to see their success." Sarah marveled at her daughter's composure. "Aren't you nervous, sweetheart?" Emma turned to her mother with eyes that held depths beyond her years. "Mommy, nervous is what you feel when you might lose something important, but we're not going to lose. Because I've prepared for every possible argument they might make, and I have something they don't." "What's that?" "The truth." Emma gathered her carefully organized folders and her pink, sparkly backpack that looked absurdly out of place among the legal documents. "And also I'm about to show them that being underestimated is the greatest advantage anyone can have." As they walked toward the courthouse entrance, Emma could feel the stares of other attorneys and court personnel. A small child carrying legal files was unusual enough to draw attention, but Emma's determined stride and the way she carried herself suggested something extraordinary was about to happen. Michael spotted them first, his face twisting into a condescending smile. "Sarah, what are you doing? This is a court of law, not bring your daughter to work day." Emma stepped forward before her mother could respond, her small voice carrying clearly in the courthouse hallway. "Actually, Daddy, this is exactly where I belong. I'm here to exercise my legal rights under North Carolina custody statutes." Morrison and Hawthorne exchanged glances that mixed amusement with confusion. Morrison knelt down to Emma's level, his voice dripping with patronizing sweetness. "Listen, little girl, court is very complicated. Why don't you wait in the hall while the grown-ups handle this?" Emma studied Morrison's face with the analytical precision of a scientist examining a specimen. "Mr. Morrison, isn't it interesting that you're already demonstrating exactly the kind of dismissive attitude toward children that I plan to address in my testimony today?" The hallway fell silent. Morrison's smile faltered as he registered the sophistication of Emma's vocabulary and syntax. "I'm sorry, what did you just say?" Emma's smile was polite but razor-sharp. "I said you're proving my point before we even enter the courtroom. Shall we proceed to see Judge Harrison now?" The family court of Mecklenburg County had seen many custody battles, but nothing had prepared Judge Harrison for the sight that greeted him as the parties entered his courtroom. On one side, Michael Thompson, flanked by two of Charlotte's most successful family law attorneys, expensive briefcases, and an air of inevitable victory. On the other side, Sarah Thompson, representing herself pro se, and an 8-year-old girl carrying a pink backpack and looking entirely too composed for someone her age. "Your Honor," Morrison began, his voice carrying the practiced authority of hundreds of courtroom victories, "we're here today regarding the custody of Emma Grace Thompson. My client, Michael Thompson, seeks primary custody based on his superior financial stability, educational resources, and overall suitability as a primary parent." Judge Harrison, a veteran of 20 years on the family court bench, had developed finely tuned instincts about cases. Something about this proceeding felt different. A tension in the air that suggested the routine custody battle he'd expected was about to become something unprecedented. "Ms. Thompson," Judge Harrison addressed Sarah, "I understand you're representing yourself today. Do you have any preliminary motions or requests before we begin?" Sarah glanced down at Emma, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "Your Honor, I'd like to request that my daughter, Emma Grace Thompson, be permitted to address the court regarding her preferences for custody placement." Morrison shot to his feet. "Objection, Your Honor. The child is only 8 years old. She lacks the maturity to understand the complexity of these proceedings." Emma stood up from her seat in the gallery, her small voice carrying clearly through the courtroom. "Young lady, you may approach the bench." Emma walked forward with measured steps, her pink backpack bouncing slightly, creating a surreal image that would later be described in newspaper articles as David approaching Goliath with a slingshot made of legal briefs. "Your Honor," Emma began, her voice steady and clear, "North Carolina General Statute 5013.2 allows children to express preferences regarding custody arrangements when the court determines they possess sufficient maturity and understanding." "Your Honor, if I may." Judge Harrison had been presiding over family court long enough to recognize exceptional circumstances when they arose. Additionally, Article 12 of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child guarantees children the right to be heard in judicial proceedings affecting them. The courtroom fell completely silent. Morrison and Hawthorne stared at Emma as if she had begun speaking in ancient Latin. Judge Harrison leaned forward, his curiosity thoroughly piqued. "Miss Thompson, are you saying you wish to present testimony regarding your custody preferences?" "Yes, Your Honor, but not just preferences." Emma's eyes blazed with quiet intensity. "I'm here to present evidence of fraud, manipulation, and perjury that directly impacts this custody determination." Michael's face went white. Morrison began frantically whispering to his client while Hawthorne shuffled through papers as if searching for a legal precedent that didn't exist. Judge Harrison studied Emma for a long moment, recognizing something extraordinary in her demeanor. "Miss Thompson, are you prepared to proceed with sworn testimony?" Emma opened her pink backpack and withdrew a stack of carefully organized folders. "Yes, Your Honor, I've been preparing for 3 weeks." Emma Grace Thompson raised her right hand to be sworn in, her small fingers barely visible above the witness stand that had been adjusted to accommodate her height. The sight of an 8-year-old taking a legal oath in family court was unprecedented enough that the court reporter later said she had to pause to ensure she was documenting accurately. "Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you are about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?" "I do," Emma replied, her voice carrying a gravity that made several observers forget they were listening to a second grader. Judge Harrison had presided over thousands of custody cases, but nothing had prepared him for what was about to unfold. "Miss Thompson, please tell the court about your living situation and your preferences regarding custody." Emma opened her first folder with the precision of a seasoned attorney. "Your Honor, I've prepared a comprehensive presentation that includes documentary evidence, witness statements, and legal analysis. May I proceed systematically?" Morrison stood up, his voice tight with frustration. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. The child cannot possibly understand the legal ramifications of—" "Mr. Morrison," Emma interrupted politely but firmly. "With respect, you haven't heard my presentation yet. How can you determine my understanding without evidence?" Judge Harrison suppressed what might have been a smile. "Mr. Morrison, please sit down. Miss Thompson, you may proceed." Emma stood behind the witness stand, transforming from a small child into something resembling a legal powerhouse. "Your Honor, this case isn't just about where I should live. It's about exposing a systematic pattern of deception designed to manipulate the court system for financial gain." She opened her folder and withdrew a carefully prepared timeline. 3 months ago, my father received notification that his deceased aunt's will included a trust fund worth $1.2 million, accessible only if he maintained legal custody of me until my 18th birthday. Michael shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Morrison's pen stopped moving across his legal pad. "Within 2 weeks of receiving this information," Emma continued, "my father stopped contributing to household expenses, hired private investigators to document my mother's daily activities, and began recording conversations to use out of context." Emma withdrew a series of bank statements, phone records, and emails. "These documents, which I obtained legally from my father's home office, show that his interest in custody coincides exactly with his discovery of the trust fund. Prior to that notification, he had visited me exactly 4 times in 6 months. The courtroom was so quiet that the air conditioning seemed deafeningly loud. But the most damaging evidence," Emma said, her voice gaining strength, "is this recorded conversation." Emma pulled out a small digital recorder, a device she'd purchased with her allowance money 3 weeks earlier. "Your Honor, last week I recorded my father discussing his true intentions regarding this custody case." Emma pressed play on the small digital recorder, and Michael Thompson's voice filled the courtroom with devastating clarity. "Look, I just need to get through this custody hearing. Once I have legal custody, I can access Emma's trust fund to pay off my debts. Then I'll send her to that boarding school in Virginia. The kid's too smart for her own good anyway. Sarah can visit on holidays or whatever." The silence that followed was deafening. Michael's face drained of all color while Morrison and Hawthorne stared at their client as if he had confessed to a felony. Sarah covered her mouth with her hands, tears streaming down her face, not from sadness but from overwhelming pride in her daughter's courage. Judge Harrison leaned back in his chair, processing what he had just heard. In 20 years on the family court bench, he had never witnessed anything quite like this. "Mr. Thompson," Judge Harrison addressed Michael directly, "do you have any response to this recording?" Michael attempted to speak, but Morrison grabbed his arm and whispered urgently in his ear. "Your Honor," Morrison said, his confident demeanor completely shattered, "we request a brief recess to confer with our client." "Denied," Judge Harrison replied firmly. "Miss Thompson, please continue your presentation." Emma straightened her shoulders, sensing that this was her moment to strike the decisive blow. "Your Honor, the recording proves that my father views me as a financial asset, not as his daughter. But there's more evidence that demonstrates his unfitness for custody." She opened another folder, revealing photographs and documentation that made Morrison visibly wince. "These bank statements show that my father has been living far beyond his means, accumulating significant debt while allowing my mother to struggle financially. He deliberately withheld support to create evidence of our poor living conditions for this custody case." Emma's voice grew stronger with each revelation. "Additionally, I have documentation of my father's attempts to manipulate me during our supervised visits. He coached me to say negative things about my mother and tried to bribe me with expensive gifts if I would tell the court I wanted to live with him. She produced photographs of toys and gadgets that Michael had given her, along with her own handwritten notes documenting the bribes attached to each gift. Your Honor, I want to live with my mother, not because she's perfect, but because she loves me unconditionally. She reads to me every night, helps with my homework, and has never once tried to turn me against my father, despite having every reason to do so. Emma looked directly at her father, her young face reflecting a mixture of disappointment and determination that cut deeper than any legal argument. "I'm 8 years old, but I understand something that my father apparently doesn't. Love isn't something you can buy, and children aren't financial investments to be managed." The courtroom remained silent, as Emma's words hung in the air like an indictment of everything wrong with the family court system's approach to children's rights. "Your Honor," Emma concluded, "I respectfully request that you award sole custody to my mother and investigate my father's unethical manipulation of these proceedings." Morrison and Hawthorne huddled with Michael in frantic whispers, their expensive legal strategy crumbling under the weight of an 8-year-old's methodical demolition. When Morrison finally stood to present his case, his usual courtroom confidence had evaporated. "Your Honor," Morrison began, his voice notably less assured than before, "while Miss Thompson's presentation is certainly unusual, we must remember that children often misunderstand adult conversations and situations." Emma remained seated at the witness stand, watching Morrison with the analytical gaze of a chess master, studying an opponent's desperate move. "My client acknowledges that the recording sounds damaging," Morrison continued, "but it was taken illegally by a minor without consent, and represents a conversation taken out of context during a moment of financial stress." Morrison gestured toward a stack of documents. "Mr. Thompson's financial records demonstrate his superior ability to provide for Emma's educational and developmental needs. He can offer private tutoring, elite educational opportunities, and cultural enrichment that Miss Thompson simply cannot match." Emma raised her hand. "Your Honor, may I respond to Mr. Morrison's arguments?" Judge Harrison nodded. "You may proceed, Miss Thompson." Emma stood up, her small frame somehow commanding the entire courtroom. "Mr. Morrison, you mentioned that I misunderstood my father's conversation. Could you please explain to the court what context would make planning to send a child to boarding school against their will for financial gain acceptable?" Morrison opened his mouth, then closed it. The question was devastating in its simplicity. "Furthermore," Emma continued, "you argue that my father can provide superior educational opportunities. Your Honor, I'd like to present my academic records from Pineville Elementary School." Emma produced a folder containing her report cards, standardized test scores, and teacher evaluations. "These documents show that under my mother's care, I'm performing at the 99th percentile in all subjects, reading at a high school level, and have been recommended for the Gifted and Talented program." She looked directly at Morrison. "Mr. Morrison, if my current educational environment is producing these results, what evidence do you have that changing it would be beneficial rather than disruptive?" Morrison fumbled through his papers, clearly unprepared for this level of sophistication from his 8-year-old opponent. "Additionally," Emma pressed on, "you mentioned that I recorded my father illegally. Your Honor, North Carolina is a one-party consent state for recording conversations when one party is present. I was present during my father's conversation, making the recording legally admissible." Morrison's face flushed red. "Your Honor, an 8-year-old cannot possibly understand the legal nuances of—" "Mr. Morrison," Emma interrupted, "I've just demonstrated understanding of wiretapping laws, custody statutes, and evidentiary procedures. At what point will you acknowledge that age doesn't determine competence?" The question hung in the air like a challenge to the entire legal system's assumptions about children's capabilities. Rebecca Hawthorne rose to cross-examine Emma, her strategy clearly designed to undermine the child's credibility through intimidation. Hawthorne had built her reputation on aggressive courtroom tactics, but she was about to discover that 8-year-old Emma Thompson was unlike any witness she had ever faced. "Miss Thompson," Hawthorne began, her voice dripping with condescension, "don't you think it's possible that your mother coached you to say these things about your father?" Emma tilted her head, considering the question with the seriousness of a scholar. "Ms. Hawthorne, that's an interesting theory. Can you explain how my mother could have coached me to obtain bank records from my father's office, or taught me to operate recording equipment she doesn't own, or helped me access legal databases she's never seen?" Hawthorne's strategy was backfiring spectacularly. Children often have vivid imaginations. "Ms. Hawthorne," Emma interrupted politely but firmly, "are you suggesting that I imagined the trust fund documentation?" Because I have the actual legal documents right here. Emma produced the trust fund papers. Are you suggesting I imagined my father's conversation? Because we just listened to the recording. Are you suggesting I imagined the bank statements? Because they're certified copies from First National Bank. Hawthorne was visibly flustered. Miss Thompson, don't you want to live in a big house with your own room and expensive toys? Emma's response was swift and devastating. Ms. Hawthorne, are you seriously asking an 8-year-old if she can be bought? Judge Harrison intervened. Ms. Hawthorne, please rephrase your question. But Emma wasn't finished. Your Honor, I'd like to address Ms. Hawthorne's question directly. Yes, my father can buy me expensive things, but he can't buy my love, my respect, or my preference for where I want to live. Those things have to be earned through genuine care and affection. Emma looked directly at Hawthorne. Ms. Hawthorne, if someone offered you $1 million to abandon your family, would you take it? Because that's essentially what my father is asking me to do, abandon my mother for financial benefit. Except in his case, the financial benefit goes to him, not me. Hawthorne made one final attempt. Miss Thompson, surely you understand that your father loves you and wants what's best for you. Emma's response shattered the courtroom's composure. Ms. Hawthorne, if my father loved me, why did he plan to send me away to boarding school the moment he gained custody? If he wanted what was best for me, why did he try to destroy my mother financially and emotionally? Love is demonstrated through actions, not words or legal briefs. Emma paused, her young voice carrying a wisdom that made grown adults uncomfortable. The truth is, my father doesn't love me. He loves what I represent to his financial situation, and that's exactly why he shouldn't have custody of me. The courtroom fell silent as the devastating accuracy of Emma's words settled over everyone present. Judge Harrison called a brief recess during which courthouse personnel, attorneys, and observers buzzed with amazement at what they had just witnessed. Emma sat calmly with her mother, reviewing her notes as if cross-examination by experienced attorneys was a routine part of her day. When court reconvened, Judge Harrison addressed the parties with visible amazement. In 20 years on this bench, I have never encountered a witness, adult or child, who demonstrated such thorough preparation, legal understanding, and articulate presentation of evidence. He looked directly at Emma. Miss Thompson, do you have any final statements for the court? Emma stood up, her final folder in hand. Yes, Your Honor. I'd like to address the broader implications of this case. She opened her folder to reveal carefully prepared legal research. Your Honor, this case represents more than just my family's situation. It highlights systematic flaws in how the family court system approaches children's rights and voices. Emma's voice gained strength as she continued. Every year, thousands of children are affected by custody decisions made without their meaningful input. Courts often appoint guardian ad litem representatives, but rarely allow children to speak directly for themselves, especially children under 12. Judge Harrison leaned forward, recognizing that Emma was making a point far beyond her individual case. Your Honor, I've researched similar cases across North Carolina and found a pattern. Children are treated as objects to be distributed, rather than individuals with preferences, insights, and rights. This case proves that age doesn't determine competence, preparation, or understanding. Emma looked around the courtroom, her gaze encompassing everyone present. If an 8-year-old can research law, gather evidence, present logical arguments, and withstand cross-examination by experienced attorneys, what does that say about our assumptions regarding children's capabilities? She turned back to Judge Harrison. Your Honor, I'm asking you to do more than award custody to my mother. I'm asking you to recognize that children deserve to be heard, respected, and taken seriously in proceedings that determine their futures. Emma's final words carried the weight of a legal revolution. This case should establish precedent that competence, not age, determines a person's right to advocate for themselves in family court. And if that precedent helps even one other child avoid what my family has endured, then everything we've been through will have been worthwhile. The courtroom remained silent as the full impact of Emma's argument settled over everyone present. She hadn't just won a custody case, she had challenged the entire family court system to evolve. Judge Harrison removed his glasses and looked directly at Emma, his expression a mixture of amazement and respect, that would be remembered by everyone present for the rest of their lives. "Miss Thompson," he began, his voice carrying the weight of legal history, "in my 20 years presiding over family court, I have never witnessed such a compelling demonstration of a child's capacity for legal reasoning, evidence presentation, and self-advocacy." The courtroom held its collective breath. "Your research into family law statutes is more thorough than many attorney presentations I've seen. Your evidence gathering demonstrates investigative skills that would impress seasoned legal professionals. Most importantly, your understanding of the facts and their implications proves beyond any doubt that competence cannot be measured by age alone." Michael slumped in his chair, the reality of his situation finally sinking in. Morrison and Hawthorne stared at their notes, their expensive legal strategy completely demolished by an 8-year-old with a pink backpack and an unshakable moral compass. "Mr. Thompson," Judge Harrison addressed Michael directly, "the evidence presented by your daughter reveals a pattern of manipulation, deception, and financial exploitation that makes you fundamentally unfit for custody. Your recorded statements about using Emma to access trust funds and planning to send her to boarding school demonstrate that you view your daughter as a financial asset rather than a human being deserving of love and protection." Michael attempted to speak, but Judge Harrison continued. "Furthermore, your attempts to manipulate these proceedings through coaching Emma during visits and deliberately withholding financial support to create false evidence of your ex-wife's inadequacy represent serious ethical violations." Judge Harrison turned to Sarah. "Ms. Thompson, the evidence clearly demonstrates that you have provided Emma with exceptional care, resulting in remarkable academic achievement and emotional maturity. Despite facing deliberate financial manipulation and emotional abuse, you have maintained a stable, nurturing environment that has allowed your daughter to flourish." Finally, Judge Harrison addressed Emma directly. "Miss Thompson, you have proven today that intelligence, preparation, and moral courage are far more important than age or size. You have not only advocated brilliantly for yourself and your mother, but you have also challenged this court system to recognize children's capacity for meaningful participation in their own futures." Judge Harrison's voice grew solemn as he prepared to deliver his ruling. "Therefore, this court awards sole physical and legal custody of Emma Grace Thompson to her mother, Sarah Thompson, effective immediately." The courtroom erupted in applause, an unprecedented reaction in family court proceedings, but Judge Harrison wasn't finished. "Additionally, this court orders Mr. Thompson to immediately resume child support payments, including all back support owed. Mr. Thompson will also be reported to the North Carolina State Bar for investigation of ethical violations, and this case will be forwarded to the District Attorney's Office for potential fraud charges related to the attempted manipulation of trust fund access." Emma's shoulders sagged with relief as her mother wrapped her in a fierce hug. They had won, not just the custody case, but something far more significant. They had proven that truth, preparation, and love could triumph over money, manipulation, and prejudice. 6 months after the custody hearing that would become known as the Emma Thompson case, courthouse personnel still spoke in hushed, amazed tones about the 8-year-old who had revolutionized their understanding of children's capabilities. The case had generated national media attention, law review articles, and legislative proposals that would ultimately reshape family court procedures across the United States. Emma sat in the same library corner where she had first taught herself family law, but now she was surrounded by thank-you letters from children across the country who had been inspired by her story. Mrs. Rodriguez watched with pride as Emma carefully responded to each letter, offering encouragement and legal resources to young people facing their own family court battles. "Emma," Mrs. Rodriguez said, "you've received another letter from Duke University Law School. They're offering you a full scholarship for when you're ready to attend college." Emma looked up from her letter writing, smiling. "That's the 5th law school offer this month, but you know what makes me happiest, Mrs. Rodriguez." "What's that, sweetheart?" Emma held up a crayon-written letter from a 7-year-old girl in California. "Lily writes that her judge listened to her preferences about custody because she told him about my case. Her mom got to keep her just like mine did." The transformation that had begun in that Charlotte courtroom was spreading across the nation. The Emma's Law proposal, Federal legislation requiring courts to provide meaningful opportunities for children to be heard in custody proceedings had bipartisan support in Congress and was expected to pass within the year. Sarah entered the library, her face glowing with pride and purpose. 6 months earlier, she had been a struggling single mother fighting for her child. Now she served as director of the newly created North Carolina Child Advocacy Program, working alongside Emma to train court personnel, attorneys, and judges on recognizing and respecting children's voices in legal proceedings. "Ready to go home, counselor?" Sarah asked, using the nickname that had stuck after Emma's courtroom triumph. Emma packed her letters carefully into her pink backpack, the same one that had carried her legal briefs into battle against Michael's expensive attorneys. Some things were too important to change. As they walked out of Pineville Elementary School together, Emma reflected on the journey that had transformed her from a worried 8-year-old into a national advocate for children's rights. The case had cost her the fantasy of having a loving father, but it had given her something far more valuable: the knowledge that age didn't determine worth, that preparation could overcome prejudice, and that one person's courage to speak truth could change an entire system. "Mommy," Emma said as they reached their car, "do you know what I learned from all this?" Sarah smiled, knowing that whatever Emma had learned would be profound. "What's that, sweetheart?" Emma looked back at the school where her legal education had begun, then up at her mother with eyes that held wisdom far beyond her years. "I learned that when adults say children can't do something, what they really mean is that they've never seen a child who was properly prepared to do it." She paused, her voice carrying the quiet confidence of someone who had proven the impossible. "And I learned that the most powerful thing any person can have, no matter how old they are, is the courage to stand up and speak the truth, even when everyone expects them to stay quiet." As they drove home through Charlotte, past the courthouse where Emma had made legal history, the sun broke through the clouds for the first time in weeks. It seemed fitting somehow that the day would end with light breaking through darkness, just as an 8-year-old girl's courage had broken through a system that had forgotten children have voices worth hearing. Emma Grace Thompson had set out to save her mother. Instead, she had saved countless children she would never meet, in courtrooms she would never see, facing challenges she could only imagine, and she was just getting started.